Do not buy an apartment in New York City without first understanding what properties you should absolutely avoid purchasing. New York City is a very complicated market. It is a very large and costly investment to purchase in New York City. So you want to make sure that what you are purchasing is a good, solid investment. So let's break it down and let's talk about the property types that you should avoid buying in New York City. But first, I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all things New York City real estate, and let's dive in. If you're thinking about buying in New York City, you're purchasing into one of the most complicated and expensive markets in the world, so you want to make sure that you understand exactly what you're buying and that it meets your criteria. Oftentimes people ask, well, what should I avoid buying in New York City? Some of that depends on your personal preferences and your criteria in terms of what to avoid. But there are some things in general that we look for to try to avoid purchasing in New York City. Now, one of the big questions that I often get asked whenever I'm working with buyers is what neighborhoods should we avoid buying in, or what are the hot and upcoming neighborhoods that we should really consider? As New York City real estate agents, we actually cannot discuss neighborhoods or demographics within the neighborhoods. That's because we have some of the strongest fair housing laws and discrimination laws in the country, and we must abide by those. If we discuss neighborhoods in a negative sort of way, or if we say that those neighborhoods are dangerous or something like that, that could be considered discrimination. So you must research the neighborhoods that you are interested in New York City. And of course, we will guide you in terms of the best possible purchase within those neighborhoods. But what may be a good neighborhood to one person, or the demographics of that neighborhood may be exceptional, are not the same from person to person. Our city is amazingly diverse, and it's one of the exciting things about living in New York City. But with that said, there are some building types, some property types that we definitely want to discuss here that you may want to avoid depending on your criteria, and make sure that the purchase is absolutely the best purchase you can make for you in New York City. Now, we can't possibly have this discussion without discussing co-ops. A lot of buyers come to the city and they absolutely do not want to purchase into a co-op. They have heard horror stories about the buying process and about the interview process, so it is understandable. But you need to understand that co-ops make up about 80 to 85% of the entire inventory in New York City, and co-ops are bought and sold every day in this city. It's sort of a way of life. So if it were that difficult, there would be no co-ops in New York City to purchase. So there are things about a co-op that you need to understand to make sure that it is the right purchase for you. If you're coming into New York City and you're wanting complete freedom and complete control over how you renovate, how you sublet, you're wanting to really just own that piece of property, then co-ops are not for you. Co-op boards have a lot of approval in what happens in the apartment because the apartment is not owned by the purchaser. You are buying shares in the corporation, and the corporation issues you a proprietary lease to be able to live in that space. So you don't own the actual apartment. With a condo, that's real property, and you own the actual walls, the actual unit within the building. Not so with a co-op. So that purchase is not for everyone. But if you're looking for a more economical solution, if you're looking to be able to take part in the entire inventory and really look at what you want to see in New York City and may want to purchase, then you really do need to consider co-ops as part of your search. But understand, it's going to come with some restrictions. Another example may be if you want to sublet the apartment or use it as an investment unit going forward in the future. And not all co-ops allow that. In fact, many have very strict sublet policies, so that wouldn't be possible. So again, we need to understand what your criteria is and understand if a co-op would fit that criteria. But definitely, if you are looking for complete freedom and complete ownership over your unit in New York City, then a co-op may not be the purchase for you. You most likely want to avoid anything that looks too good to be true on the prices. We do not have fire sales in New York City. We don't have things that are sold extremely under market value unless there is some sort of issue with that apartment. In part, that's because, again, co-ops make up 80 to 85% of all of the inventory in New York City, and the boards of the co-op can control the price of the units and how they're being sold. So if an apartment is being sold extremely under market value or at a fire sale price, the board simply won't approve that sale because they don't want the rest of the share values to be coming down in the building. So they want to have some control over the price. That's within reason. If you're obviously choosing to sell something or buy something that's a little bit under market price, then chances are they'll let that go through. But that's the reason why we don't have these extreme value buys in New York City. Even a fixer-upper, something that may need to have a total gut renovation, is usually going to be closer to market price than not. So if you see something that is priced extremely low and looks too good to be true, chances are it is. There may be something wrong with the building's finances. There may be something wrong with the building's maintenance or common charges, or perhaps the building is on a land lease, some things we're going to talk about here in a moment that causes that price to be extremely low. So you want to be aware of those prices and make sure you're not pursuing a purchase that is going to be bad for you in the future. Now, you might run across very low priced sales units that also have a tenant in them. They're already being rented. And you think, oh gosh, I could buy this fabulous 3-bedroom apartment for just $250,000 or something really low, and I'll get the tenant out when their lease is over. Not so easy. Chances are many of those apartments are rent stabilized or rent controlled apartment, and it is very difficult to get the tenant out of the apartment. In fact, in many cases, you may have to wait for something to happen to the tenant or for the tenant to actually choose to move on their own. So it is not easy because of the very strong tenant rules and guidelines in New York City to get a person out of a lease. So if you see something that is a tenant-occupied apartment and it's being sold for extremely low values, then chances are that is not going to ever work for you as a primary resident. So if you do see an apartment that is tenant-occupied, you want to make sure that it's in a building like a condo and there is no rent-stabilized or rent-controlled lease attached to that unit, so that if you choose, you can, in the lease, vacate the unit and you could use that as a primary residence going forward. Or you want to buy the property as an investment property, and in that case, you generally want to make as much profit as you can. So you would want a standard lease that is at market value so that you can maximize your income, and those are usually not rent controlled or rent stabilized units. Now, another type of purchase that you may want to avoid is a land leased building. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that the building does not own the land that it's sitting on. That land is leased to the building and it's owned by some other entity. Now, I always tell my clients that not all land leases are created equal. For example, Battery Park City, which is the lower part of Manhattan, was a planned community, and those are all land lease buildings. So those land leases were done through the city and the state. They're not going anywhere. When the leases are up, they're just going to get renewed. Nothing's going to happen to those. So those purchases, if you're fine with purchasing a land lease building, does make sense. There's no issue with those. There are other buildings, however, where the land leases are not good and they cause very high maintenance payments and they cause a lot of worry. Those purchases would be problematic. I'm not saying that people still don't purchase in those buildings. For various reasons, they may do that. But if you're looking for a good, solid investment, chances are you want to avoid most land leased buildings. Another kind of building that you may want to avoid are those with with excessively high maintenance or common charges. We call the common charges in co-ops the maintenance fees because they are the fees that are charged per share to upkeep the maintenance on the building. We tend to refer to those in condos as common charges. Either way, if the maintenance or the common charge is higher than all the other buildings around it or higher than the particular neighborhood in New York City, you want to understand why. Many times, that's a red flag that says something may be up with the building's finances. Maybe they're overextended, maybe their reserves are very low, maybe they've had a lot of assessments and a lot of improvements or necessary work done on the building that has caused that maintenance to go up, and perhaps those are going to be ongoing. So you want to make sure that the maintenance payment reflects what you get in the building. Now, some of those maintenance payments and common charges are going to go for amenities. So if there's a large staff in the building, you have to take that into account. So a high maintenance or a high common charge doesn't always mean problems, but you want to have someone who's very experienced, like a buyer's agent or your attorney, will look at these and be able to advise you and let you know if it looks like they may be problematic or a sign that the building may be having some issues. Another kind of purchase you may want to avoid are buildings with no amenities. Now, there are plenty of buildings in New York City that have no amenities, no doorman, no gym, no rooftop, no laundry in the building in some cases, and that doesn't necessarily affect the value or make it a bad purchase. For example, many of the beautiful brownstone apartments down in the West Village tend to be walk-ups that have no elevator, no doorman, no special amenities, but the values on those apartments, because of where they're located and because of the type of apartment they are very high. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. However, once again, you're looking at those maintenance and common charges. If they're extremely high for no reason, for example, they're not maintaining an elevator building and a large staff in the building and a gym in the building and maybe a garden or a roof deck in the building, then that becomes a problem because you are paying a very high maintenance payment for no amenities. You may also want to consider the resale value and what people are looking for at any given time. There may be periods where people aren't looking for buildings with a lot of amenities, but they want those old charming buildings. The tastes kind of change in New York City and kind of goes in cycles. So you want to understand what you're buying and you want to understand what the resale value may be, and is a building with a lot of amenities going to give you a really good resale value in the future, or will you be better off looking at a building that has no amenities but maybe in that really desirable area of town and give you a really great resale value. So it's not necessarily that you need to avoid buildings that have no amenities, but you do need to understand what the values would be in the future. And finally, you may want to avoid new development buildings. Now, it's exciting to come to New York City and think about buying a brand new place that nobody has lived in and that is beautiful and very up to date, but understand that the closing costs on new development can be extraordinarily high. We're talking upwards of $40,000 or $50,000. The developers want to get a lot of their money back, and they usually do that through some closing costs. So they put things like you need to pay for their attorney, you need to pay for some of their taxes that they normally would pay in a resale situation. In addition, usually with new development, especially if they're brand new on the market, you're going to need to pay full price. It's kind of like buying a brand new car. You may buy it and then it may depreciate the moment you drive it off the lot. It hasn't had a chance to sit against the rest of the market and actually settle in its value. This is the value where the developers think it is. They want it to be that price because of what they've spent on the building, and they are asking for you to pay the asking price. Now, that may get a little less rigid as it sits on the market. But generally speaking, on new development, we try to negotiate on those very high closing costs. We try to go in and get some of those closing costs taken away. Again, if it's brand new to the market, chances are that's going to be difficult to do. If it's been sitting for a while, we may be able to negotiate most, if not all, of those closing costs away. So if you're not prepared to come in and pay very large sums on closing costs and understand the process of buying into these buildings, then new development may be a kind of property that you want to avoid. So as you can see, none of this is really do not buy that kind of property. A lot of it depends on your criteria and your needs, and there's lots of gray area there as you're beginning to search. So you need to come to the New York City market with a clear understanding of what you want and really work with someone who will help guide you through that process and help you understand all those gray areas to make sure that you have avoided the kinds of properties that will not work for you. Again, I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, hit that notification button, take a look at all the different ways that you can get in touch with me, and let's continue the conversation. If you're thinking about buying or selling in New York City, I would love to help you out, and I'll see you next time.